My mom hung up on me mid-sentence. Not because the call dropped, she hung up. I was 17 years old, standing in the parking lot of the Dollar General 2 blocks from our house, holding a phone that had just gone silent, and I remember thinking, okay, that's it then. She'd said it the night before, during the fight that started over dinner and ended somewhere around midnight. If you walk into that recording studio, don't bother walking back into this house. I thought she was bluffing. Parents say things like that, they don't mean it, except sometimes they do. My name is Ivy. Wait, no, I keep doing that. Old habit, giving myself someone else's name when I tell this story, like distance makes it easier to say out loud. My name is Nora, and this is what happened. I grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, in a house that smelled like my mom's potpourri and my dad's work boots. My mom taught Sunday school and volunteered at the church bake sales and had an opinion about everything: what I wore, who I sat with at lunch, what I should study, what I should be. My dad was quieter about it, but he agreed with her. He always agreed with her. That was the dynamic, she decided. He nodded. What they decided when I was around 14 was that I would go to WVU, study nursing like my aunt had done, get a stable job, marry someone local, and settle down. They had the whole thing mapped out. My aunt even offered to help me apply for a CNA training program the summer before junior year. The problem was that I wanted to make music, not in a vague, daydreaming in my bedroom kind of way. I'd been writing songs since I was 11. I taught myself guitar from YouTube videos. By 15, I had a SoundCloud with about 800 followers, which doesn't sound like much, but in Clarksburg, West Virginia, it might as well have been a stadium. A producer in Pittsburgh, a real one with actual credits, had heard my stuff and reached out. He said he wanted to work with me. He said I had something. When I told my mom, she laughed. Not a dismissive little chuckle. A full laugh, like I'd told her a joke. "You think you're going to be a country star," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't want to be a country star," I said. "I want to write. I want to produce. I want. She turned back to the stove. "You know what your aunt wanted at 17? She wanted to be a dancer. You know what she is now? A charge nurse making $80,000 a year with full benefits. That's what happens when you grow up." I stopped trying to explain it after that. I saved up babysitting money for 8 months. I told my parents I was going to a school event when I took the bus to Pittsburgh to meet with the producer. His name was Aiden, and he had a small studio in Lawrenceville, and he spent 3 hours listening to my demos and telling me exactly what he thought, which was that I needed work, but I had a real instinct for melody that you couldn't teach. He wanted me to come back. He said if I was as serious, he could help me put together something real. I was serious. I started going back every few weeks. My mom found out the way moms always find out. She went through my phone. She didn't say anything to me directly. She called Aiden's number and told him that if he contacted her minor child again, she would report him to the police. She told me that I was being manipulated by a stranger on the internet, that the music industry was full of predators, that this was exactly the kind of thing that happened to girls who didn't listen to their mothers. I tried to show her Aiden's website, his credits, the artists he'd worked with. She wouldn't look. Then I made the mistake of telling her about the demo I'd been asked to submit. A real submission, to a real Nashville label, through Aiden's connection. I thought if she heard that something concrete was happening, something with paperwork and actual people and a return address in Tennessee, she might take it seriously. She took the sheet of paper I'd printed out and tore it in half. Right in front of me. Then she put both halves in the kitchen trash and said, "This conversation is over." That was October. By March, she'd gone into my room, found the notebook where I kept my lyrics, and thrown it away. I don't know exactly when she did it. I just came home one day and it was gone. When I asked her about it, she said she didn't know what I was talking about. I had most of it memorized. But that's not the point. The fight in April was the last one. I'd applied to a summer music intensive in Nashville, a 6-week program, competitive, with a small scholarship attached. I hadn't told them because I knew what they'd say. But I got in, and I had to tell them because I needed them to sign the financial aid form. I was 17. I still needed a parent's signature. My mom didn't tear the acceptance letter this time. She folded it very neatly and set it on the counter and said, "You are not going." Then she went to her room and closed the door. My dad said almost gently, "Nora, you need to think about what kind of future you're setting yourself up for." I said, "I have thought about it." He said, "Then you should think harder." We went around like that for a few days, all of us tense and careful, until the night I told them I was going anyway, that I'd find a way, that I wasn't going to stop. My mom looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Then you can find a way to live somewhere else too." I thought she meant she was sending me to my aunt's. I started to say something about that, about how I'd be happy to stay with my aunt for the summer, and my mom shook her head and said, "I don't mean for the summer. I mean if you're going to live your life like we have nothing to say about it, then you can go live it somewhere else." My dad didn't say anything, he just looked at his plate. I went to my room and packed a bag. I kept waiting for someone to knock on the door to say, "Okay, let's calm down and talk about this." Nobody did. I came out with my bag and my guitar case, and my mom was sitting in the living room with the TV on, not looking at me. My dad was in the kitchen. He looked up when I walked through. I said, "So that's it." He said, "She'll come around." I don't know if he meant me or my mom. I walked out the front door and pulled it closed behind me and stood on the porch for a minute, genuinely not sure what I was going to do next. I was 17 years old with $234, a guitar and a duffel bag, and I had nowhere to go. Now, before I tell you what happened after I walked off that porch, I want to ask you something real quick. What time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious where people are watching from when they find these stories. I stayed with a friend from school for 3 weeks. Her parents knew what was happening, and they didn't ask too many questions, and I will be grateful for that family until the day I die. I turned 18 in June, which meant the summer program in Nashville would accept me without a parent's signature on the scholarship paperwork. I called the program director and explained my situation. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Get here." I got there. Nashville in the summer is a different world when you're 18 and terrified and completely on your own for the first time. I slept in a shared room with 3 other girls in the program housing, and I ate a lot of peanut butter on white bread, and I worked harder than I have ever worked in my life. I was up at 6 every morning, in the studio by 7, staying until they turned the lights off at night. I was absorbing everything: the mixing, the arrangement, the business side of it, the way a room full of professional musicians talks through a session. I had wanted this for so long that having it felt almost unbearable, like I was afraid to exhale in case it disappeared. At the end of the 6 weeks, one of the program's guest instructors, a songwriter who'd had 3 top 10 country hits in the previous 2 years, pulled me aside and asked if I had representation. I said no. She said I should get some. I didn't know how to do that. I figured it out. The next 4 years are hard to summarize, because they were both the hardest and the best years of my life, sometimes at the same time, sometimes on the same Tuesday. I worked at a Starbucks for 14 months and gave private guitar lessons on weekends and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Nashville that I shared with another musician I'd met through the program. I waitressed at a honky-tonk for a while. I did demo work, singing and playing on other people's recordings for cash, which taught me more about production than anything else I'd ever done. I kept writing. I wrote constantly. I wrote on the bus, on my breaks, at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. I have notebooks from those years that are embarrassing to read now, not because the writing was bad, but because you can see so clearly how desperate I was, how much I wanted it, how scared I was that it wasn't going to happen. My mom and I didn't talk. She'd called twice in the first year, once in August about 4 months after I left, and once the following March. Both times she said some version of the same thing, that I was making a mistake, that it wasn't too late to come home and get my life on track, that she'd forgive me for everything if I just came back. I'd said as calmly as I could that there was nothing to forgive me for and that I wasn't coming home and that I hoped she'd have a good day. Then I'd hung up. My dad texted me on my birthday every year. Just "Happy birthday, Nora." Nothing else. I wrote back, "Thanks, Dad, that was the extent of it." My aunt sent me a card after she heard what had happened. It said she was sorry and that she loved me and that the door to her house was always open. I kept that card. I still have it somewhere. At 22, I got my first real publishing deal. It wasn't big. It was a small independent publisher, and the advance was not going to change my life. But it meant someone with actual industry infrastructure believed my songs were worth owning a piece of. I cried in the parking lot of the building after I signed the paperwork, alone in my car, for probably 15 minutes. By 24, I'd placed 3 songs with other artists. One of them got picked up for a TV show soundtrack. I started doing sync licensing work, getting songs placed in commercials, films, TV, and that's where the real money started to come from. Not enormous money, but consistent, real money, enough to stop waitressing, enough to pay my rent and my health insurance and my student loan from the one semester of community college I'd taken, and still have some left over. At 26, I released my own EP under my own name. I put it out independently, because by then I understood the industry well enough to know that wasn't the limitation it used to be. I booked a small tour, 15 dates, venues that held 300 or 400 people, nothing that would make the news. But every show sold out. Every single one. I stood on stages in places like Columbus and Asheville and Birmingham, and looked out at rooms full of people who had specifically chosen to spend a Friday night listening to my songs, and I thought, Mom, you tore up the letter, you threw away the notebook, and look. I thought it. I didn't say it out loud. I was 28 when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. It was a Tennessee area code, but not one I knew. I almost didn't pick up. I picked up. It was my dad. He was using a different phone, he said, because he'd gotten a new one. He said hi. He asked how I was doing. There was something in his voice that I couldn't quite locate at first. Not anger. Not the kind of careful neutrality he used to use when he was avoiding saying the wrong thing in front of my mom. Something else. Something thinner. I said I was doing well. I asked how he was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your mom's not doing well, Nora. I didn't say anything. He said she'd been having trouble with her heart. That she'd had an episode back in January, a serious one. That she'd been in and out of the hospital. That there were some significant bills. He said they'd exhausted their savings and were having trouble with the mortgage, and that they didn't know what they were going to do. His voice cracked a little at the end of that sentence. My dad, who I had watched remain completely stoic at his own mother's funeral, had a crack in his voice. I sat with that for a second. The thing you need to understand is that I had spent years, genuinely years, thinking about what this moment might feel like. Some version of it, the moment when the people who told me I was throwing my life away needed something from me. I had imagined myself feeling triumphant. I had imagined feeling cold. I had imagined a clean, sharp satisfaction like finally. What I actually felt was tired and sad. And something like grief, though I wasn't sure exactly what I was grieving. I said, How much are the bills? He named a number. It was not a small number. Between the cardiac care, the follow-up procedures, the medication costs. My mom's insurance had a gap in coverage that they hadn't fully understood until they were in it. They were looking at somewhere north of $60,000 in outstanding medical debt. In this country, that can happen to you. It happens to people who did everything right, saved carefully, did not go around tearing up their daughters' acceptance letters or throwing away their notebooks. It happens. I'm not going to tell you I didn't notice the irony. I told my dad I needed a few days to think. He said okay, he said he understood. Then, just before we hung up, he said, I'm sorry, Nora, I should have said something. Back then, I should have said something. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said, I'll call you back, Dad. I spent 3 days thinking about it. I talked to my therapist, who I'd been seeing for 2 years, and who was extremely good at not telling me what to do while making it very clear when I was lying to myself. I talked to my closest friend, who is one of those people who will tell you the true thing even when it's inconvenient. I took very long walks. I sat with the version of me that was 17 and standing on that porch with a duffel bag and asked her what she thought. I'm going to be honest with you because that's the only reason to tell this story. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to say I was 17 years old. You told me I could go live my life somewhere else. So I did. I built something real out of nothing, without you, without any help from you, without even basic acknowledgement that what I was doing was worth doing. You threw away my notebook, you called my producer and threatened him, you hung up on me in the parking lot of a Dollar General. And now you want me to fix this. Part of me wanted to say all of that, and maybe some part of me did, in my head, in those long walks. But here's the thing I kept coming back to. I became someone who creates things. That's what I do. I make things that didn't exist before. And somewhere in the middle of one of those walks, I realized that if I said no, if I turned away from 2 people who were scared and broke and sick and asking for help, I would be making something too. I'd be making a version of myself I didn't actually want to live inside. That's not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I forgave them, because I don't think what happened to me can be tidied up that neatly, and I'm suspicious of stories that end that way. What I did was decide that this specific choice, what to do right now with the information I had about 2 people who were in genuine trouble, was mine to make on my own terms, not theirs. Mine. I contacted a medical billing advocate. There are people whose entire job is to navigate hospital billing, negotiate debt, find programs you didn't know existed. I found one through a nonprofit that specifically works with families dealing with unexpected cardiac care costs. Many hospitals have financial assistance programs. My parents' hospital had one that can reduce or eliminate bills entirely based on income. The advocate helped my parents apply. A significant portion of the debt was reduced. I covered the rest directly through an arrangement I set up, so the payments came from an account they didn't have the number to. They knew I was helping. I told my dad that much. But they didn't know the amount, and I didn't make them ask me to confirm it every month. That felt important to me, for reasons I can't fully articulate. I didn't want it to be a performance. I didn't want to sit across from my mom and watch her say thank you in a way that cost her something. I just wanted it to be done. My mom called me after the bills were handled. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in 9 years. She didn't sound the way I remembered. She sounded smaller. Not weak exactly. My mom will never be weak. But like something had been filed down. She asked how I was. I said fine. She said she'd been listening to my songs. I didn't say anything to that. She said she thought the one about the drive home was very beautiful, and she hoped I knew that. I said I know. She said I was wrong. About a lot of things I was wrong. I said, yeah, Mom, you were. We were quiet for a moment. It wasn't a comfortable quiet, but it wasn't unbearable either. It was just true. I told her I needed to go. I had a session in an hour. She said okay. She said she hoped the session went well. I told her thanks and that I hoped she was feeling better, and we hung up. I sat in my car for a little while after. Not crying exactly, just sitting. There are a few things I want you to know, because I've thought about this a lot and I think they matter. I am not a cautionary tale about following your dreams. That framing is too easy. The truth is more complicated, which is that I got lucky in specific ways. I met the right person at the right time. I had a friend's family who let me sleep in their guest room. I didn't have to deal with the additional weight that a lot of young people carry when they're on their own at 17. And I know that not everyone who leaves home at 17 with a guitar and $230 makes it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I am is someone who made a decision a long time ago to bet on something I couldn't prove yet, and then I did the work, for years. Unglamorous, grinding, not good enough work until eventually it became good enough. My mom's heart is doing better. The doctors adjusted her medication and she's been stable. My dad calls me more often now. Not much more, but some. We mostly talk about nothing, the weather, the neighbors, a show he's watching. It's careful and a little awkward, and it's what we have, and I'm okay with that. I didn't fix my family. I don't think that's possible. Some things that are broken stay broken, and what you do with that is find a way to build your life around the shape of the damage instead of inside it. Last week, I finished the last track on my second album. I was in the studio at around 10 at night. Everyone else had gone home, and I sat in the empty room for a few minutes before I packed up. There's a painting on the wall of that studio, an abstract thing, all blues and golds that the studio owner bought at an art fair somewhere, and I looked at it and I thought about the notebook my mom threw away. I thought about all the songs that were in it, the ones I'd had to reconstruct from memory, and the ones I couldn't remember and lost forever. And I thought, I still wrote more. I always wrote more. I picked up my bag and I walked out into the Nashville night, and the air was warm and smelled like summer and whatever comes next, and I thought, I'm still here. After everything, I'm still here. And that's the part they never saw coming.